Recording. Okay, folks, today I am joined by Ray Mendoza and Alex Garland, co-directors of the upcoming A24 film Warfare, which hits theaters on April 11th. Gents, thank you for your time and congrats.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Um, so to me, this is a film which its standout to me was the sound design. What are some of the great sound design films? The first things that I think of are Heat and Mad Max, and were there any that you sort of went to inform your approach on this film?
I'm going to say one thing is no, we did not go to films to inform the sound design. We went to Ray to inform the sound design because this film intentionally was told through the perspective of a veteran trying to recreate their memories and then the memories of other veterans that were involved, veterans of this specific incident, as accurately as possible. And the thing that the film had to be most careful of was bringing in the tricks of cinema that have been developed over the years that I've worked in for more than 2 decades, and to try to unlearn all of that stuff and go to first person lived experience and recreate it accurately.
To the point of sound, talk to me about directing and recording actors screaming. Screaming like this, a pure guttural scream that we hear in this film, is not something that you hear in film a lot. And I'm curious about like the actual process of that. Is that something that you could even give notes on? Just tell me whatever it comes to mind when it comes to that part of filming.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some notes on screaming, on how to scream. I think oftentimes, uh, just to talk about screaming, is there's different types of screams. There's like somebody who's coping with pain for long periods of time. And lots of times there's peaks and valleys. So like if I were to break your leg, and the initial shock of it would hurt. And then once, obviously your body goes into shock. But if I were to move you, like it would re-engage all those nerves and you'd kind of go through that pain cycle again. So just from my kind of educational standpoint, like conveying that to Joseph Quinn and Cosmo Jarvis, um, yeah, we had to talk a lot about that, when they screamed, how they screamed, when morphine was introduced, and what that does to subside the pain. So yeah, there's like even just that arc in itself, this kind of pain arc, we had to talk about and discuss. Um, yeah, the actors can probably explain this more accurately than I can. But yeah, I think, for Joseph Quinn and Cosmo to be that engaged, because it helps all the performance, right? A lot of things are done concurrently. So multiple things are happening at once. And they were very much supportive of each other, even when they weren't on camera. Joe Quinn and Cosmo are still in that mode. And that's very exhausting. Not only for them, but for the actors to be immersed in this very, traumatic, chaotic event. And so yeah, in regards to the sound design, the screaming was constant, and so yeah, it's intense. Yeah.
Actually, oddly, to do with the screaming, it goes to the sort of previous thing we were just talking about, which is just being allied to reality. You often hear people screaming in films, and usually the screaming will stop after about 30 seconds or a minute and a half, because the film has cut away, it's moved on, it cuts to a different group of people, it cuts to a week later. And this film is real time, so it can't do that. And if somebody screamed on and off for 35 minutes or 40 minutes, that's what the film has to do. So you don't get the relief or being let off the hook from someone else's pain that you do get given typically in a film. One of the things, of course, is Joe Hildebrand, who Joe Quinn was playing, was able to give information to Joe, which was really helpful about how things changed when he was coming round to when he was being dragged by the person that dragged him, played by Will Poulter. And uh, we also talked about protecting your voice. You're going to be doing this in a way for 9, 10 days. So how do you protect your voice? When do you go full tilt. And there would sometimes be takes where we'd be like, okay, this is the take. This is the one where you are at level 10. And then other times we would say, Joe, bring it right down. Like even silence it. Protect your vocal cords because these are sort of technical parts of the sort of filmmaking process. So it varied.
Ray, talk to me about having your memories actualized in front of you like that. That's extremely rare for anybody, let alone a veteran, let alone one who has lived through the things that you have. I can only imagine the range of the range of feelings that you felt.
Yeah, I mean, some were not so triggering, and some were. It was I knew that there were a few specific scenes that I was gonna have a hard time with. And I was dreading it. It's like being a kid, and it's like, hey, you're going to the dentist on Friday, and it's Monday, and because you're dreading it, Friday comes instantaneously. And so this scene in particular is when DeFaro is dragging Cosmo up the driveway. Elliot was there with me. And Elliot doesn't remember. I have, lots of discussions with Elliot when he first like woke up in the hospital. He continues to have a lot of questions, but he started describing it to him like how I had a hard time. He's a power lifter looking guy. He had all his equipment on. I had all my equipment on, and so it's just a lot of weight to drag. I just remember just describing how tough it was, and I thought we were just going to be like, that we were both going to get shot in the street. Um, so there's this scene, and it was just we had done a few takes, but there was just one. It just was perfect in the sense of like a total sensory recall. Elliot was there, and Elliot started to get emotional. Once I heard him getting emotional, it just all those feelings over 20 years, almost 20 years, started to just that monster catches up with you eventually. And it's something that I've kind of loosely talked about. I talked a lot about it with Alex, and that was probably the most I've ever spoken about it. But to see it, to talk about it, and to get that sensory kind of triggering, if you will, it just unleashed. I had a walk off set. I started crying for a good 10 minutes, and Alex had to kind of take over for the rest of the day. But it's, I think that was probably the only way, in a weird way, that I could have processed that with Elliot being there. It was a very powerful moment for me. And so yeah, that's like one of many examples of how emotional it was.
Let me just use this chance, and I'm so sorry I spaced on the top to thank you for your service. I want to talk about filming in one space. Alex, this is something you've done before. Men, Ex Machina are largely small scale, but this film is far more explosive, far more manic, far much more movement. As you just said, it's filmed concurrently. So talk to me about the challenge of filming all these bodies and all of this movement and light and sound in such a small space.
Well, we knew it was going to be complicated. We knew there was a lot of people to cover, and we knew also that the sequence of events that we had to show has all sorts of inherent complications, which in filmmaking terms break down to things like prosthetics, explosions, and so SFX world as well as sometimes VFX world. What we did was we thought we will just simplify everything as much as we possibly can in terms of the tools we had available to us. So not in terms of what we were representing, what we were depicting, but the processes by which we would depict it. And one of the key ones of that was to not have a multiple set broke into several spaces, which, for example, we had in Ex Machina. So there would be a soundstage, and on the soundstage, there would be a corridor with maybe one room attached to it. And then there'd be another room on a different soundstage. And then there was a location in Norway where we had to move from Pinewood in England to Norway in Norway. And in this, we just crunched that all down to one literal space. So what we did was we built a set, but we built it as if it was a location. So if you had walked onto that set, you would have found a whole street with like 13 buildings and trees and telegraph poles and wires hanging between them, and a house that you could walk into and go into every room. And if you looked out the window, you'd see the appropriate view because it was physically there. And that was the approach. That meant we could move seamlessly, just as you would in a location, from upstairs to downstairs to the driveway to out on the street to back again. Whereas in a film, typically, as you cross a threshold, as you walk through the door, maybe 2 weeks later, you will pick up what happened when people walked out the door. It meant we could shoot the whole film in sequence, very quickly, very fluidly, follow people up and downstairs, and so on and so forth. That was the approach.
And I'm sure that was a huge help for the cast to just further
Definitely.
immerse themselves.
It's a helpful, absolutely. Every single department, you're absolutely right. Certainly the cast, but every department is benefited by that.
So
And
I was, oh, right? Oh,
Yeah, no,
sorry.
you're good. Yeah.
I was really taken by the choice to give the family whose home they're holed up in the final lines of the film. I think that that is a statement in and of itself. How did you guys arrive to that choice? What was the thinking there? And were there any other choices along the way that you thought you might have done?
um, uh, there was another option that we had, and in fact, we shot material for it, which was ending the film at the military hospital, which Elliot and Joe were taken to. In the end, we made a complicated decision, which oddly related to the way that the house is a kind of character almost in the film. And once we'd left the house, to an extent, it felt as if the film was over. That felt that we realized that was the natural point to end. I think also there was another dimension to it, which is the function of, I'm going to speak for myself here. The function of that scene, part of it for me, the scene that we shot but did not use, was Ray saying to Elliot, he said, "I love you, man." That was a thing that Ray remembered saying to Elliot in that hospital. And that expression of love, which, all of the dialogue in the film is kind of situational, and this was a personal expression, was also represented by Ray hugging Elliot when he arrived on set. And there was something that felt important to us about seeing the real people alongside the actors that had represented them. And also, Ray made this film for Elliot. And to say for Elliot and to cut to Elliot as he is now also felt incredibly meaningful. So that was the reason for the decision we took.
Cosmo did him proud, man. Unbelievable work. Ray, I want to talk about putting the cast through buds. I'm sorry if that's not the technical term. Is that like the
It
buds
is the
training?
technical term, but yeah, it wasn't buds.
Okay. Well, whatever it is that you put them through, was there a certain uh challenge or day that you had earmarked in your head that like, oh, this is definitely gonna break them? And what about the cast sort of impressed you through that process?
Yeah, there wasn't like a day that, oh, I know this is going to break them. It was quite the opposite. I'm very much trying to build them up for something.
Cool.
It's a very, I was a BUDS instructor. I was a land warfare instructor where I taught land warfare, maneuver warfare, and tactics to SEAL teams. So I'm no stranger to like teaching how to get people to work together to achieve an objective. I've trained a lot of actors, training them to fire a weapon. That's the easy part for me. I can get somebody to fire a gun. I can get from A to Z fairly quickly. Um, but I had to get all of them to be able to shoot out. So that was like the first priority. And it does two things. It lets me know like who's strong at certain things and who's weak at certain things. And we were going to be doing some very like high kinetic, very fast, close proximity firing. Just even when I tell them that, like, if you've never shot a gun before, you're like, oh, fucking holy shit. So that pressure is naturally there. And so safety, I use safety, and I use these words to convey how serious this is. So I need to set that tone right off the bat. Because not only are they portraying someone who's my friend, and has experienced something traumatic, but they are going to be doing these inherently dangerous things. So that just kind of like puts a tone on it. The next goal was probably the most important thing, second to safety, which was the brotherhood. You hear it a lot, it's thrown around a lot, but like, what is it? And it's different. Brotherhood exists in all different types of cultures, whether it's sports or the military. And so they were going to create their brotherhood, their culture, like just their little thing, whatever that was. And that only comes from forcing them to be together, to train together, to work out together, to live together. Where we shot it helped because they're isolated, and so they were kind of forced to learn about each other through training. By design, I put them in unwinnable situations. Each person had a job, just like you would in the military. There's the leadership, which is Will Poulter, Charles Melton, Joseph Quinn. You have your machine gunners, you have your medic, you have your comm guys. Each serve a purpose, and I give them jobs, and then I put them in an unwinnable situation, which is like, all right, you have two down men. I want you to carry 5-gallon jugs of water. You maintain 360 security. You will start here. You need to end here. You got 10 minutes to get there, and you have 2 minutes to leave. Go. Um, and they never made it. But they got to start working on rotating guys out, carrying stretchers. Guys are getting dehydrated. Some guys are not as shape as other guys. Well, what do you do? Do you just leave them behind, or do you stop? And then we would set up scenarios where, you know, bad guys will be moving on them and creating stress. And you can kind of just see, once you do that once, it just went to shit, right? It goes to show you like how chaotic, even in a simple task, how things when things are chaotic, even the simplest tasks are difficult. Just to communicate one word, they could not do it because everybody was just screaming. And so I had to take that and like, all right, now all that chaos, we're going to learn to control it. Right? Just because there's noise going off and people are screaming, you can still communicate. I'm going to teach you guys how to communicate verbally and non-verbally. So there's that component, and then just the autonomy, right? Just the autonomy of they all had objectives and things they do, but I kind of gave them some room to create their own space in which they had to execute that checklist. Because oftentimes if you give someone ownership, they're going to care more about it, right? Because it's now their ideas, it's their way of doing it, it's their way of running a group of guys and keeping them on time and having that burden of leadership. And so they took a lot of autonomy, and I'm super proud. They're very supportive of each other. When they weren't on camera, we had guys on comms instead of like a PA or first AD reading off the lines. It was the counterpart, the real guy playing the role. He wasn't on camera, but they were always there to support each other. If it was a very serious week of Joe or Cosmo screaming, they often countered it with levity, which is what we really do. And it's just funny to see these guys just take on the same cultural kind of like characteristics or idiosyncrasies of like a platoon overseas where you use levity for these serious moments. And they were just very supportive of each other. And it shows on film. They're just able to predict each other's moves to do these movements. And you only know if you've ever had to either train in it or teach a group of people to do it. It's hard. It almost becomes like instinctual how they're able to predict somebody, how they're going to move and when they're going to move. Like, oh, like Taylor always dips his shoulder, and I know when he does that, he's going to move left, right? That only comes from exposure to each other with time and the amount of time that they spent with each other. So kudos to them, and I challenge anyone to recreate that. Yeah.
Alex, I want to ask you about AI quick. Having done Ex Machina, one of the most notable AI films of the last few years. Just this week, OpenAI rolled out an art feature in which Chat GPT can recreate famous art forms, Pixar, Studio Ghibli, so on and so forth. What are your general thoughts of the convergence of art and AI, both from, since you have both a writing point of view and visual point of view?
It's coming. What are you going to do? I think that prior to this, what you had was lots of different singers, writers, playwrights, poets, filmmakers, you name it. I'm talking about the creative world. Presenting different sorts of takes, perspectives, and in some sense they were competing with each other. And so perhaps a new voice has entered into that realm. What you think about it is not exactly irrelevant, it's relevant, but it's like the tide coming in. It's just going to happen. It is happening.
Okay.
To me, the problem actually is not AI itself. It's the motivations and the thought processes of the non-AI people who run the companies that are bringing it in, why they're doing it, what they are careful of, what they are not careful of, their own sense of omniscience, which in the case of people who run tech companies seems to be limitless. They perceive themselves in a sort of messianic or even quasi sort of divine way. And it is them more than the concept of AI itself that I find concerning. You have unelected people acting with more power than politicians who are not accountable at the moment to anybody. And there's not just one, there's several. And some of them are fucking batshit crazy. So that is problematic.
So I've got to start to wind down here now. I could try to make some news and ask about your upcoming film 28 years later, or I could satisfy the film fan in me and ask about your work that I love. So I'm going to ask you about Sunshine, one of my favorite sci-fi films of all time.
Thank you.
Blows my mind every time I watch it. Is there anything that you could tell me about that film that you're particularly proud of?
I think that it arrived at a time when there was a certain kind of sci-fi that hadn't been made for a long time. It used to exist a lot, and it had tailed off slightly, not vanished in completely, but its frequency and its support had dried up a bit. And I'm pleased that we managed to get it made at that time because it wasn't easy.
I love that film. Okay, I do have time for one more, so I am going to try to squeeze a 28 years from you. Tell me what we could expect from Ralph Fiennes. He is one of the best doing it, and he looks absolutely insane from the brief shots that we've seen.
I think the thing about 28 is that these films that have been directed by Danny Boyle and Nia DaCosta are very drama heavy at times. So they function as horror movies, I guess you could say. They're within that genre, but there's also a lot of drama. And what someone like Ralph Fiennes does is just pick up whatever you are putting in front of him and then elevate it. That
Yeah, I'm
what you can
psyched.
expect from Ralph Fiennes is a very good performance from a very good actor.
Yeah, I'm so psyched on that. Congrats on the trailer, which blew up, guys. Congrats on both your work on this film. Ray, like I said, thank you for your service and for trying to put that into film so guys like me could really understand what you all went through. Alex, I love your art, so thank you for that as well. Cheers,
Really
guys.
appreciate it. Thank you.